I don't really understand what people like Andy Burnham or Sadiq Khan expect would happen if there was a ceasefire. Do they think that Hamas would be like, oh, you know what? Yes, let's now live peacefully next to you. That's just not going to happen. It never has happened. Anytime there has been a ceasefire, Hamas has used it to restock and replan and to build more tunnels. And they spent 2 years. This is the other thing I want to say is, Hamas spent over 2 years planning this attack. Apparently at no point in those 2 years did they plan to protect its own citizens. I don't really see why this is Israel's responsibility.
Given what's happened overnight, both in Gaza and in the UN, what do you make of the UK's abstention in that UN vote?
Well, it's definitely very interesting. I mean, I do want to say, first of all, that every single Jew that I know in the UK and the US just looks at the prospect of a ground invasion by Israel into Gaza with just absolute dread and horror. And the pictures from Gaza of, these poor people who are just innocent people caught in this crossfire between Israel and Hamas, are just heartbreaking, completely devastating and heartbreaking. But I have been surprised by the number of people in this country that I know on the left or, count themselves as liberals who really see this as Israel's fault, that Israel is being unfair on Gaza, evil Israelis, killing Palestinians. When in fact, we have to remember what happened on October 7th. We all knew, anyone could have predicted that Israel would react in this way to Hamas coming into Israel and raping, slaughtering, and kidnapping 1,400 of its own citizens, many of whom are still kidnapped. So I think, we have to ask ourselves, would any other country be reprimanded in the way that Israel has been for retaliating against a terrorist group whose specific charter is the genocide of Jews, when that terrorist group has invaded Israel, has attacked its citizens, and will almost certainly do it again? Hamas, we know, has seen October 7th as a triumph. Israel, I think a lot of people forget, is quite a small country, definitely a rich and powerful country, but a small country, surrounded by other countries that have hated it since its inception and have doubted its right to exist. So yes, Israel does respond strongly against attacks. And, God knows I have criticized it in the past, and I certainly criticized Netanyahu and the Likud party and et cetera, et cetera. But there is a reason Israel responds strongly, and that's because it is constantly having to defend its existence against its neighbors who doubt its right to exist.
So how do you feel about such an overwhelming vote in the UN in favour of a ceasefire?
It is of no surprise to me at all, but I am very happy that the two countries that I am a citizen of, America and the UK, have either voted no or to abstain. I really don't think it's reasonable to expect Israel to not respond to Hamas, a terrorist group, a recognized terrorist group that deliberately targets Jews, that Israel should have some humanitarian truce with them. Why is this on Israel to have a humanitarian truce with a terrorist group that wants to destroy it?
On a related note, I think bringing it just to the situation in this country, earlier this week, Keir Starmer suggested in an interview that he thought Israel had the right to cut off power and water from Gaza. He's since claimed that that's not what he meant, but that that's not quelled the anger amongst his own party and also Muslim communities that Labour relies on. There is all sorts of talk of various shadow ministers threatening to resign. The London and Manchester mayors, Sadiq Khan and Andy Burnham, have called for a ceasefire. So has the leader of the Labour Party in Scotland. Muslim councillors have signed a letter to Keir Starmer urging him to back a ceasefire. Other Labour sources are saying it's a significant misstep, perhaps his most significant misstep that he's made as leader so far. In striving to repair some of the damage that was done by Jeremy Corbyn, do you think Keir Starmer has made a terminal misstep with this?
No, not necessarily. I first of all think it's really sad that this issue of defending Israel or not defending Israel has become a left and right issue. I know better than most that, of course, the government and Netanyahu in Israel are very right wing. But, ultimately, these were 1,200 people, innocent people in kibbutzim and at rock festivals who were so cruelly and brutally slaughtered, as we now know from the IDF releasing Hamas's own GoPro footage, literally cutting open pregnant women and raping elderly women. So I don't really understand what people like Andy Burnham or Sadiq Khan expect would happen if there was a ceasefire? Do they think that Hamas would be like, oh, you know what? Yes, let's now live peacefully next to you. That's just not going to happen. It never has happened. Anytime there has been a ceasefire, Hamas has used it to restock and replan and to build more tunnels. And they spent 2 years. This is the other thing I want to say is, Hamas spent over 2 years planning this attack. Apparently at no point in those 2 years did they plan to protect its own citizens. I don't really see why this is Israel's responsibility. Of course, Israel has to avoid civilian deaths, but Hamas has always embedded itself in civilian areas. There are 2.3 million people in Gaza, 400,000 Hamas fighters. They are embedded in citizen areas, and Israel has gone after to fight them in the same way that, and yes, of course, mistakes were made after 9/11, but in the same way that America had to deal with Al-Qaeda. When a terrorist group exists to destroy your population, then it is that country's responsibility to protect its population. Israel is sort of trying to do that. Hamas did not try to do that.
So in some way you think calls for a ceasefire is almost virtue signaling in some capacity.
Of course everybody wants peace. You'd have to be a psychopath not to want peace. And certainly in the Middle East, which has suffered so much. But I think these dreams of a ceasefire are delusional. And I think a lot of people obscure to themselves or just don't know what Hamas is actually like. Hamas is not the Palestinian people. The Hamas should go. The Palestinians deserve better than Hamas. The Palestinians have been protesting against Hamas for years and been killed for doing so. And I didn't see a lot of these people who are now, calling for the rights of Palestinians, defending them then. It seems to me that what they are actually talking about is how much they hate Israel for a lot of these people. And there are good reasons to be angry with Israel. But the Palestinians deserve better than Hamas, and Hamas should go.